So let's say you're wanting to incorporate evolutionary processes in your organization. So how does an organization really catalyze this evolutionary current, this evolutionary energy, and keep it going and sustain it? Well, this is compared to a typical, let's say, corporate organization, which is focused basically on top-down command and control. You know, the executives at the top establish the vision, mission, strategy, and then basically cascade the objectives down to the lower level subordinates, and compensation is tied to achievement to those objectives. That is, helpful in as far as it has gone, and it's been a useful approach in the last several hundred years as organizations continue to kind of focus on productivity and refined achievement. But what we've seen is that a couple of things. One is that people no longer want to be treated like machines or kind of like cogs in the wheel, right? People actually want to. They're sick of that. People are wanting more autonomy. They're wanting to really step into something and feel dignity of having meaningful work, right? And secondly, it actually doesn't work as well as it used to, right? It worked. The command and control organization worked much better at a time when basically economies were local and or national, and basically there was kind of relative stability in the national sort of sphere, and there was decent amount of wealth and kind of predictability, and the infrastructure was pretty stable and all that. But today it's a very different world, right? And it's increasingly more of a different world. And we talk about VUCA as the context for our global system, which is, and it comes from the military terminology. VUCA refers to volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous conditions. So these are the conditions of the world more and more these days. With instability in weather and climate conditions being one of the main factors that sort of throws everything for a loop. But then there's pandemics, right? There's war and supply chain disruptions, right? There's so many dynamic challenges to predict and control organizations that actually predicting and controlling it's not as useful anymore. So what can we do when that achievement approach actually is reaching its limitations? Well, we can create an evolutionary organization. We can actually align with something much deeper than the limited kind of comfortable systems of the middle upper class Western nations, and align with the power much deeper that has been present for thousands, millions, billions of years, right? Since the beginning of time. It's the force that animates the entire cosmos. This is going big here for a second, right? That's evolution, right? Evolution has, since the very beginning, brought subatomic particles together to form atoms, right? And atoms together to form molecules, and molecules to form eventually life, cells, right? And on and on and on, and then more complex life, and then complex conscious human life, right? And so this force that creates photosynthesis, we cannot do photosynthesis. As much as we try to replicate it, we can't, right? Nature, and by nature I mean with the big capital letter nature, like the entire universe, the principles behind the evolutionary process is much more powerful than anything we can kind of predict and control and achieve. So I want to outline about 11 points, 11 bullets for what does it look like? How do we catalyze an evolutionary organization, and how do we keep it going? Okay, so here's some of these points here. First, and you can think of it any kind of organization, a corporate structure, an organization like in the for-profit world, but also a nonprofit world, volunteer world, social groups, communities. There's the same principles at play. Okay, first, I want to call the first principle or first point, I'm calling it gathering. So when we have people to come together to do something, you have to gather people first. And I don't mean just physically, although that's part of it. But what I mean is gather everyone's stories. Really invite people in to the effort, right? And what does this look like? This looks like, acknowledging everybody individually, not only by name, but also inviting people to share what brought them here. What are you allured by? What are you attracted by? What is your why? Why is this important to you? So you gather people in, make sure every voice is heard in the room, right? Or as many as possible. And if it's a large group, then you can break people into smaller groups and have one-on-one, you can have dyads, right? But you have to gather, just like, electrons, protons, and neutrons gathered and were lured together to create an atom, okay? People are lured together to participate in something of this evolutionary current, which gives me to the next step. The next step I'm calling context, or set the context, or contextualize. And so what is this context? You have to paint the picture and bring everyone into a larger evolutionary context. So just like I did a few minutes ago when I said atoms, molecules, cells, we actually need to recognize that we're part of something larger. Okay? So when you're gathering people, gathering their stories, and then you can weave them together and set them in a large frame that actually has enough room to hold all of them. If you're an entrepreneur starting a new company, the energy of entrepreneurship is not just an excitement to make money, right, or to build a new product. Underneath that impulse, the entrepreneurial impulse, is the evolutionary impulse. That's why it's so exciting to start a new business, because you're actually tapping in to the leading edge of what evolution wants, right? That there are needs. Evolution is a response to need. Okay, so there are needs in the world around you as an entrepreneur, and you recognize that, wait a minute, I have a capacity to meet that need. And so you step up and with an exciting idea, maybe in a dream, you dreamt up an idea, or with a few friends, you wrote it on a napkin, right? You get excited about this idea, but again, it's not just I want to make money. It might feel like that, or maybe it's not just I want a new product out there. It may feel like that, but beneath that energy is the energy of the evolutionary process itself. Okay, so you need to set the largest context possible, right? That everyone is participating in the evolution of, we can call it consciousness, we can call it humanity, we can call it reality, we can call it, the L word, love, right? Evolution of love. How do we love each other more, right? But that, in the corporate world, people are afraid of the term love. It's like, ooh, it's too, um, it's too icky, right? But that's what animates everything. So good luck doing anything without it. So the third step, when you've set the context that you're participating in the evolution of something larger, the third is, now how does that great framework actually apply to us here? So what are we vision? So the third step is visioning, and visioning, a collective visioning. And so the visioning is about, okay, what is the kind of world that we want to create through our efforts together? So if let's say you're in a biotech company and you're having new scientific discoveries, maybe you envision a world where cancer is no longer something to be afraid of, right? Or maybe you envision a world, maybe you're working with youth and you want every youth to know that they have some unique gifts to give, right? And especially maybe in the inner city or in marginalized areas, maybe you want to envision where you envision, every girl and boy finding purpose in their life and making some great contributions to businesses in their community. Maybe you envision environmental conservation. Maybe you envision, you're saving the whales, right? Whatever effort, cause you might have, envision what it's like, what it would be like in the present tense. So you actually want to paint the picture, right? So I envision a world where every single individual knows that they are a unique expression of the evolutionary cosmos and has something to offer, right? And that they are welcome in the universe and that their desires are actually worthy, that there's dignity to having needs and having yearnings and longings for this lifetime, that they're a unique puzzle piece that fits into a larger puzzle. And I imagine, depression and suicide rates dropping, and I imagine, conflict transformation into creative relationship building. I envision, businesses for the social good. I envision countries coming together and discovering their common purpose together and recognizing that they don't have to be so fixated and attached to their particular viewpoint, that we can open up because there's this unique self. When I realize I'm a unique self, and I can talk more about that in a separate video, I realize that I don't have to be clinging to my opinion or perspective, that I can trust that I have a unique offering to give, but I also am evolving, and there's a way that I can expand and incorporate more. And so I don't have to get tied. So I see polarization diminishing, and I see people coming together. So what I'm just doing is describing a vision for myself in my own business, for example. But whatever it is, you got to have a vision. And again, it's in present tense. So in 10 years, in 20 years, when we complete our work, as we do our work, this is the world as it will be, as it is. Okay. So the third step is mission. Okay. So when you've painted a picture of the vision of the world that you want to create, now you have to ask yourself, what is the vehicle that will move us toward that vision? And the vehicle is the organization, the group, the company, right? So you actually have to create a mission, and a mission is something that you do. A vision is a state of being in the future that is as if it is present. And the mission is, what do we do together, right? So in my business, I facilitate unique self-emergence, right? I light in certain places in the world of work, I light a fire under people and invite them to step into their fullness, right? So it's an action. But it's a big action, right? It's not very specific in terms of like, it's not a SMART goal, right? The mission is, what do I do? What do we do together, right? How do we act, our behavior? But a big one, right? So maybe it's, if you want to, and that mission statements are generally like this, right? It's you know, uh, um, reduce, let's see, well, let's see some examples here. Let's say a nonprofit that is about improving the lives of women and children who face terminal illnesses in the developing world. Or we educate women in Sudan to create vocational enterprises, right? Or we protect the environment by repurposing medical supplies. Okay, so mission, it's a mission statement. Okay, so you've got this is kind of setting the stage here. Now the next step is what I'm calling, David Cooper-Ryder, who wrote a lot about this, is called appreciative inquiry. Appreciative inquiry is when you look at what is already happening, maybe little bits and pieces, that is currently already living out what we're trying to achieve. And you always find something, right? What are some glimpses of evolution that's already happening, right? How is this something that is already being done, right? So, you can say, let's say you haven't even created a business yet, you haven't even incorporated it yet, but your business is about helping youth achieve better test scores, right? Let's say you know a few youths, and you've already mentored some young people, right? Or let's say your nephew and niece uh, you actually have an opportunity to have a conversation with them, right? Or you've seen posts on Facebook about how to improve test scores, and you share them with your young friends, right? So glimpses, kernels, right? Little things here and there, and appreciating that it's not something that is in such a distant future. There's actually a bridge moving us there. And when we practice appreciative inquiry, it actually builds energy. It energizes the system. And energy and evolution are tied very closely, right? When we're connected to the evolutionary impulse, we feel energy, we feel our aliveness, and the group feels its aliveness. So appreciative inquiry. Step 6, imagination. Okay, so then you look at, okay, some things are already happening, but what would need to happen in order for us to get there, in order for our vision and mission to be actualized? Like, what are some specific things that we need to do, right? And this is similar to visioning earlier, except this is much more specific. Okay, so let's say vision is we'd have to create a program and a 6-week course to do this outreach, or we have to hold an event in San Francisco, or we have to hire a marketing person, right? So you really want to use your imagination to think of, well, how do we get there, right? This is something people are good at. Brainstorming is kind of what we do here. So next step is what I'm calling symphonizing, or unique self-symphonizing. This is a particular jargon here. Unique self-symphonizing, meaning, okay, now we have a bunch of things that we want to do, imagination we've created. Now, who is the most suited to take on ownership of implementing these certain things? And it's really important to have ownership, right? People can feel like, oh, I actually, it lives or dies because of me, right? So so you want to make sure that the people who have the gifts, the strengths, the capacities, and the passion, the desire, are taking on implementation of these things. Now, there will be times when nobody wants to do it, but it has to be done. Now, the question at that point is to ask, well, if nobody wants to do it, then does it really need to be done? Or is it that we need to find someone else that wants to do it, right? Or does it, sometimes we can't be attached to, it's not all exciting all the time. We actually have to put in the hard work to do things we don't want to do. And that's actually how evolution works too, right? It's bigger than our own egoic drive and desires, right? We participate in something larger. So sometimes we actually have to suspend what we want immediate gratification and commit to something we don't want to do. As long as it's not the whole thing. I think we wouldn't want a person to be doing 100% of something they don't want to do. That's not sustainable, and that's actually not how evolution works too. But a fraction, maybe the 80-20 rule, that 80% of what you do should be things that you really want to do, and then 20% is like, hey, you got to do it. Okay? So this is unique self-symphony, or symphonizing, when people kind of sign up to take ownership of things. Okay. Number eight, then you have to look at, okay, how do we keep this going, right? How do we align intrinsic and extrinsic rewards? Intrinsic and extrinsic rewards. And there's an author that I really, well, before I mention the author, this means that, okay, if people are putting in their life to this, make sure they're getting paid, right? If this is the way that people are spending most of their time, then you need to make sure that they have some economic compensation, because that's the way that people can eat and breathe, and also that money actually represents what we want to commit to and invest in, right? So you have to make sure there's a system of extrinsic reward. That's an extrinsic motivator, is payment, right, or income. And then intrinsic rewards. So Daniel Pink wrote a book called Drive that outlines this really succinctly and beautifully. He talks about AMP, A-M-P, AMP, meaning in order to have intrinsic motivation, in order to make sure that people are aligned with their intrinsic motivation, they need to have autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Now, the purpose we've already talked about, right? We've already established prior to this. Autonomy means that people can't feel like they're being micromanaged. Again, people have to feel like, okay, it lives or dies because of me. Now, if I need help, I need to go reach out for someone, and there's someone that will check in on me just to see that I'm on the right track, right? But it's not someone that's breathing down my throat at every second. There's a trust here. I have some autonomy. Mastery, meaning it's something that actually if I focus on and take ownership of, I can actually get better at. It's a skill that I can master. It's a mastery. Um, so there's a pathway to growth that by participating in this particular thing, it actually is not for the thing itself only. It's also for my growth that I can master that, right? So if people are doing things that they have autonomy and that they can master and that it's part of a larger purpose, you're going to get much more intrinsic motivation, meaning people are going to want to do things without being kind of the top down, you have to do this because I told you so, because if not, we'll fire you or we're going to dock your pay or something like that, right? Super important, right? Intrinsic motivators. And the latest, the most advanced and leading edge organizations are very attuned to this, right? That people need to find intrinsic pleasure in what they're doing. All right, so step 9 is aligning systems and culture. So you've got something moving here now. Okay, let's look at the systems of the organization and the culture and how can we align it so that it supports these efforts and doesn't thwart the efforts. So you want to look around and say, well, what what kind of policies do we need to put in place or guidelines? If it's kind of a loose voluntary organization, you can just say agreements, right? What agreements do we need to put in place? If it's a more of a corporate company or has an organizational structure, then you want to say, well, what are the policies that we need to put in place? What are the recurring events that are scheduled in the calendar that will prompt people to either check in about things or remind them what the project's about, or remind them of certain values that you want to promote, right? Or maybe there's seasonal activities, regularly occurring kind of quarterly meetings, right? What kind of physical structures support this? So if you want people to be working with each other, you need to have a space, or a virtual space, but some technology, whether it's a conference room, right? Cubicles that are semi-open so you can have people talk with each other. You need to have time where people are gathering, right? You need to have Zoom software or ClickUp or some project management software, something that actually supports these efforts, right? There has to be some way that these structures, you can't rely on people just to figure it out all themselves. You need to have a coordinated system and culture, right, to support this, right? It includes rewards and recognition, bonuses if you have a company, financial structures, right? That's all part of it too. Is like, what are you paying people to do, right? Does it support movement towards the mission, or does it support just busy work, right? Okay. Number 10, point 10, and I'm calling this spiraling. Spiraling. And this is where it gets beautiful and fun and kind of interesting here. As you continue this implementation, you actually have to go back to the beginning and start all over again. But you're not going back to the beginning, you're not going backwards, you're actually going forward. So every time you get together, you have to reweave in these, okay, we're participating in something larger, our vision is this, our mission is this, making sure people are still engaged in what they're doing, right? And you repeat, rinse and repeat, right? It's a spiral, and the spiral should be getting deeper and bigger. And by deeper, I mean the quality of the efforts needs to deepen. Things need to be integrated with each other, so it's not just a bunch of work done, but they're integrated. So you have to realign what people are doing, and let's say someone creates an onboarding process for the organization, and it's and then someone else creates an interview process for hiring new people. Well, maybe as you spiral around, you got to realize, wait, those have to be together. You have a recruitment process that interviews, hires, and onboards people, and it needs to be all integrated, right? So that's what I mean spiraling. So you're going back and you're reviewing things and looking for opportunities to integrate, to streamline, to improve, right? So that's the deepening, and spirals get deeper and also wider, meaning they incorporate more, they go bigger. So there actually is an increase in size, but not just for the sake of growth. So it's not just make more money, make it bigger, better in that sense, but it's actually there's a certain um, size that's appropriate for the organizational effort. And oftentimes there's a critical mass of people that need to be involved in order to kind of energize things. So you do want it to grow, right? Not in a hyper growth way. That's kind of the hyper capitalist approach of like immediate fast growth at all costs. That's dangerous, and that is violent to the human soul, right? So we actually want it to have a natural growth, just like an acorn grows into a sapling, grows into a tree on a certain organic timeline. It needs to grow, but you don't need to pump fertilizers in it to just make it, grow super fast. Actually, you need the conditions right. You need to nurture the conditions, right? So this is all part of spiraling, the spiral of growth and transformation. Okay, and you also track progress in this step here. And then finally, and this is part of kind of sustaining the spiral, but it's also embedded throughout the whole process. So the 11th point is called managing polarities. Managing polarities. What do I mean by that? Polarities are always present. Polarities are two interdependent opposites that both need each other in order for a system to flourish and grow and success to be achieved over time, right? So for example, there has to be, so in other words, let's say a very simple example is action and rest, right? If people are working 75 hours a week or whatever it is, and they don't rest, you're going to have people burn out. And so managing a polarity there is actually you need to notice when people are overdoing something and incorporate the opposite. So you need to tell people, hey, rest. Turn your phone off on the weekends. Turn your computer off on the weekends, guys. Like rest. Okay. There's also a polarity of flex and flow, meaning flexing being kind of like we're going to do this way. We're going to make decisions. We're going to move things forward. We're going to progress. And then flow is you kind of surrender to the flow, right? You got to let go. But you can't always be letting go. You have to actually step in and make something happen, right? So that's flexing and flowing. Another one is a simple polarity is challenging and supporting. So let's say at the beginning, a CEO is just really like, you guys, we got to do this. Like, come on, get yourself together. Why didn't you do this activity? Like you challenge people, right? But if it's always challenging, you're going to make people feel like crap, and it's actually demotivating. So you have to find a time to, oh, wait a minute, I also want to support people and appreciate them when they do something really well, right? That's an example of a polarity. Another polarity, individual and team. You can't always be having team meetings to decide everything, right? That is waste people's time. There's people that kind of freeload and step aside and just sort of wait for other people to do the work. You need to have time to come together and meet as a team, and then you need to have time where people go off and do their own things and work as an individual. You also need both team and individual recognition and rewards, right? And then kind of overall is you have top down and bottom up processes. That's a polarity, meaning the CEO or the director, the executive, whoever's kind of or just the founder. It could be the founder. At times needs to just be like, hey guys, we're doing this. We're going to make a decision here. This is our vision. This is where we're going. Like, it needs to really provide direction. And then there's times when that person needs to step back and say, what do you all think? Like, let's come together. You tell us what you want, right? Bottom up, right? Bottom up. You need both. You need both. You can't always have it bottom up because then people just go off and then do anything that they want, or you have action paralysis. People can't do anything because they're waiting for everyone else to agree, right? And unanimity, for example. So this is managing polarities. This is so crucial. I can't tell you how crucial this is because the more that we manage a polarity, it's not just we flip flop from one side to the other, one side to the other, one side to the other. It's not that we focus on paying people extrinsic rewards and then we just forget about that and then just focus on intrinsic motivation. We're actually every time we go back to the opposite, we're weaving. We're weaving. It's a spiral. It's not just an infinity sign, it's an infinity sign that spirals. Okay. So that's what polarity management does, is that over time we integrate opposites, which is the very mechanism of evolution. When we integrate opposites within ourselves, and it doesn't mean we blur the opposites, it means that we have a healthy relationship between the two and we can navigate between them so that we don't feel like we're overdoing and excluding the opposite, but we're actually always considering and incorporating both. That is if we do that within ourselves, we will transform, we will grow. That's just the nature of evolution. And if we do it within an organization, the organization will thrive. It'll sustain itself. It'll feel aliveness, right? Right? And so these are what I'm thinking of is sort of 11 pieces of creating an evolutionary movement in an organization or a group. And the last thing I'll say is think of your organization not as a well-oiled machine. I can't stand that phrase when people say that. We're not a well-oiled machine. That is not how we are. That's the old version of this top-down kind of corporate structure. We are a dynamic living ecosystem. Think of it that way. Dynamic living ecosystem. Dynamic living ecosystems, first of all, are living, so you treat it with dignity. Every piece of the ecosystem is treated with dignity. And you also have to cultivate. You have to water the seeds. You have to till the soil. You have to provide nutrients. And ultimately, you can't force things to grow or force things to happen. You have to invite, right? There's certainly plants do respond to human interaction. There's studies that show that, right? That's just kind of to help with this metaphor play out a little bit more. But people respond to each other. And if we treat each other like organic, growing, thriving potential beings, if the people aren't thriving, they can. We're actually, again, we're harnessing the most powerful power, energy that animates everything, the stars, the solar system, photosynthesis, um, you know, revolution, right? It's the same force, and it can power and energize your organization too. So I hope you go on and jump in this river and feel that current of evolution pouring through you and your team. Thanks.